The seas have always been Earth's greatest concealment. Beneath their shifting tides lie landscapes where forests once stretched, where herds once grazed, and where fires once burned in the night to keep the darkness at bay. Entire chapters of humanity's story may be drowned there, held silent beneath the weight of salt and time. Imagine the bones of ancient hunters lying beneath silt, their tools locked in stone, their voices gone, but their presence lingering. The ocean floor is not only a graveyard of ships, but perhaps of civilizations, entire beginnings erased by rising waters when the ice melted and shorelines crept inward, claiming the lands where people once built their first homes. This is where our mystery begins, at the edge of memory, at the threshold where history dissolves into myth, and where the world we think we know may be far older, far stranger than we allow ourselves to believe. Before we sink deeper into these forgotten waters of time, take a moment to stay with us. If you find yourself drawn to these mysteries, to the hidden chapters of our origins, lend your presence to this journey by subscribing and sharing. It allows us to keep diving into the silence of the past together, unearthing what the earth and sea still hold secret. The grasslands stretched endlessly beneath a sky of shifting light, a canvas where storms gathered and broke in a single afternoon. The wind moved like an ancient breath across the earth, bending tall stalks into a shimmering sea of green and gold. It was here, among these plains, that early humans lived not as masters of their world, but as fragile participants in a drama much older than themselves. Every day was a negotiation with hunger, every night a treaty with fire against the vastness of darkness. The mammoths moved slowly across the horizon, their hulking shapes both terrifying and magnificent, while packs of lions and hyenas waited in the margins, testing the edge between predator and scavenger. For the people who dwelled here, survival meant attentiveness. A snapped twig in the distance could be the tread of prey or the stalk of death. Their eyes traced the grass for patterns, for the faintest ripple that revealed an approaching herd. To hold a sharp flint blade in hand was to hold hope. Stone struck against stone until sparks leapt out, fragile lights born from collisions, the promise of warmth and protection. Fire was never taken for granted. Each ember was watched, guarded, fed with dry wood and bark, as though it were a living child whose survival meant their own. The glow illuminated faces marked by smoke and dust, shadows cast deep on the walls of temporary shelters. The rhythm of existence was measured not in days, but in cycles of need and reprieve. The plains offered abundance, but demanded vigilance. Herds of bison thundered by, shaking the earth as though giants had risen beneath it. To bring one down was triumph, but triumph was fleeting. The meat had to be cut quickly, dried or roasted before rot or thieves, both animal and human, could claim it. Bones were split for marrow, hides stretched into shelter, sinews twisted into cord. Nothing was wasted, because nothing could be. In this economy of survival, gratitude was indistinguishable from necessity. At dusk, when the fire crackled and the plains grew hushed, the people gathered in a circle, and silence gave way to murmured voices. Here, language was not yet poetry, not yet philosophy, but it carried weight beyond survival. Words, halting and sparse, pointed to rivers, to trails, to danger, to memory. Yet even then, beneath the smoke-stained sky, words carried echoes of more than instruction. A gesture toward the stars might mean direction, but it might also mean wonder. To hear the cry of a child born in the night was to hear a future trembling into being. Predators were never far. Eyes gleamed at the edge of firelight, patient and unafraid. Lions circled, waiting for a lapse in vigilance, their low growls blending with the wind. Wolves moved in shadows, sometimes kept at bay, sometimes brought near in uneasy kinship. To live on the grasslands was to know one's place in a hierarchy both fragile and brutal. There was no illusion of dominance, only the precarious balance of existence. Each dawn was uncertain, a coin toss between survival and oblivion. Yet within this precariousness, something remarkable stirred. Hands shaped stone not only to cut but to craft. A flake chipped away more cleanly than chance would allow, a blade honed with deliberation until it gleamed with sharpness beyond the accidental. Fire was carried from one camp to another, preserved in burning sticks wrapped in bark, a portable sun against the dark. These were not the acts of instinct, but of intention, of foresight, reaching beyond the moment's need. And so, beneath the endless sky, in the quiet rush of grass, humanity was not only surviving, but beginning to invent itself. The plains were not silent. They were filled with sound, the low thunder of hooves, the whisper of insects, the shriek of carrion birds spiraling overhead. But in those moments, when the herd had passed and the predators lay low, there was a silence, heavy enough to press against the skin. It was in that silence that thought deepened, that the crackle of fire and the pulse of the heart merged into something more than survival. To look into the embers was to see not only heat, but memory, as if the flames themselves contained images of hunts past and hunts to come. Perhaps it was there, before the flickering light, that humanity first began to dream. Dreams may have been more than rest. They were warnings, signs, visions that guided action. A dream of a river swelling might caution against a low crossing. A dream of ancestors might remind the living of debts owed. Though we can only imagine the meanings, we know that memory and imagination began to blur. In the plains, where death was near and life uncertain, such visions were not dismissed. They were part of survival, another form of knowledge carried alongside sharpened stone and kindled fire. The children learned quickly. They traced lines in the dirt with sticks, imitating the gestures of elders, building small fires from gathered twigs, chasing shadows with laughter that rang strangely against the vastness of the land. Every lesson was immediate. The sound of a bird that warned of predators, the track of an antelope pressed faintly into the soil, the way the wind shifted before storms. To survive was to learn, and to learn was to inherit the world as it was given. But the world was not only generous. Storms came without warning, sweeping across the plains with rain that flattened grass and drowned the fire. Lightning tore the sky into jagged shards, setting whole patches of earth ablaze. To be caught without shelter was to feel the raw scale of nature's indifference. In such moments, humans huddled close, seeking safety in numbers, pressing bodies together against the cold. And when the storm passed, when the fires burned themselves down to ash, there was always rebuilding, always renewal. Even in these endless cycles, something shifted. A group might linger longer near a river, shaping stones more finely, weaving hides into tighter coverings, beginning to imagine permanence where there had only been movement. These were seeds of change, faint and fragile, but within them lay the first hints of what would later grow into settlement, into society, into civilization. Yet at this stage, they were still ashes in the grasslands, scattered, temporary, blown by the wind. The night sky spread above them, unbroken and vast. The stars shimmered as they always had, indifferent yet mesmerizing. For early humans, they were more than distant fires. They were patterns to be traced, markers for direction. reminders that the world extended beyond the grasslands, beyond the horizon itself. A hunter staring into that immensity might feel both wonder and dread, as though the sky whispered of worlds unseen. The sense of being small was overwhelming, but within that smallness lay a strange kind of dignity, the recognition that survival here was not guaranteed, and yet every day it was achieved. It was triumph. Ashes marked their passing. Fires burned down, bones split open, hides scraped clean, tools broken against stone. Each trace left behind was fragile, but together they formed the outline of a life lived in constant negotiation with the elements. And though most of those ashes would be scattered by wind and time, a few would endure, buried, preserved, waiting for distant descendants to uncover them and ask who these people were. The answer lies not only in bones or blades, but in the silence that surrounded them, the silence they filled with sparks, with voices, with the fragile beginnings of story. The chapter of humanity written here is not one of conquest, but of endurance. The plains did not yield easily, and the people who walked them did not imagine themselves rulers of creation. They were instead survivors among survivors, creatures among creatures, bound by the same hunger, the same fear, the same fragile hope. Yet from this fragile ground, the long arc of humanity began to rise. The firelight flickered, the wind whispered through the grass, and in that fragile glow, the seeds of everything to come were already stirring. Rivers are restless storytellers. They carve the land with slow persistence, their waters carrying silt, fish, and memory alike. For the first humans who followed their winding paths, rivers were more than water. They were lifelines, mirrors, and boundaries. To drink from a river was to taste survival. To bathe in it was to feel renewal. And to follow its course was to move through the veins of the earth itself. Every settlement, however temporary, grew around the river's edge, where the promise of life mingled with the threat of its taking. At dawn, mist clung low to the surface of the water, turning the river into a ribbon of silver that caught the first light of the sun. Children crouched at the bank, watching their reflections tremble, their laughter carried downstream. Elders knelt nearby, dipping vessels of clay or skin into the current, their movements slow, deliberate, as though they were not just drawing water, but performing an ancient rite. The river was more than utility. It was presence, a force that commanded respect. The bones of animals gathered near the edges, bleached white by sun and softened by water's touch. Hunters returned often to these places, their spears raised, their hearts quickened by the knowledge that prey too would come to drink. A single strike in this vulnerable moment might mean food for days, hide for warmth, sinew for tools. Yet the river gave and took in equal measure. The same currents that carried fish also carried away those who slipped too far, those who misjudged its strength. The memory of drowning was imprinted early in human experience. One careless step, and the river swallowed without return. It was here, along the riverbanks, that something shifted in the human spirit. Survival was no longer only about the living. For the first time, the dead were given to the earth with deliberate care. Graves dug shallow in the soil were lined with ochre, that deep red powder drawn from stone, staining bones with a color that spoke of blood and fire. Bodies were placed, not as refuse, but as remembrance, curled as if in sleep, accompanied by tools, beads, or antlers. To bury was to acknowledge loss, but also to whisper of continuity, of ties between the living and those who had gone. The act of burial transformed the river's edge into a place of memory. Every mound of earth marked a story that did not vanish. Children learned to recognize the spots, to tread softly, to leave offerings of flowers or stones. In these gestures lay the birth of reverence, the first steps toward ritual. The river, which fed the living, now guarded the dead. Its murmur became a lullaby for those beneath the soil, a voice that never ceased, even when all others fell silent. Ochre was more than decoration. To stain bones in red was to grant them life beyond death, to mimic the flush of the living body, to suggest blood still flowed within. Perhaps it was a hope that the spirit might return, or a prayer that the departed carried strength into the unknown. Whatever the reason, it revealed a deepening awareness that death was not an end but a passage. The river, always moving, mirrored this truth. One never stepped into the same waters twice. Likewise, the dead did not simply vanish. They were carried onward, unseen, yet present. Evening by the river was a time of stories. Firelight reflected off the water, doubling its glow, turning the surface into a shifting stage of orange and shadow. Elders spoke of ancestors, of hunts remembered, of spirits glimpsed in dreams. Children listened wide-eyed, their minds blending fact and wonder until both felt the same. Sometimes the stories were warnings, the spirit of the drowned, the beast that lingered in the reeds, the shadow that followed when one traveled too far alone. Other times they were gentle, the grandmother who became a bird, the father who lived among the stars. Memory and myth mingled, fed by the rhythm of water against the banks. The river was also a divider. Across its breadth, other groups moved, strangers who might be kin or foe. To see smoke rising on the opposite shore was to feel the tension of choice, approach or retreat, trust or defend. Many encounters ended in silence, each group watching the other from afar, unwilling to test the current or the intentions that lay beyond it. Yet sometimes the river became a meeting ground, a place of exchange where shells, hides, or stone passed from hand to hand. Here, among the reeds, human society expanded beyond its immediate circle, weaving bonds that stretched farther than the horizon. The bones of the dead bore witness to these choices. Archaeologists today find healed wounds, fractures that mended, signs that care was given even to those who could no longer hunt. Others show the brutal marks of violence, skulls split by stone, ribs pierced by spear. The river gave community, but also confrontation. It was a stage for both compassion and cruelty, and its waters bore silent witness to each. When floods came, they rewrote the landscape. Camps disappeared overnight, swept away in torrents of brown water and floating debris. Graves, too, were swallowed, bones carried downstream, scattered far from their resting place. To those who lived through it, such floods must have felt like anger, the river's voice raised in rage. But after the waters receded, new soil was left behind, fertile and rich, and life began again. In this rhythm of destruction and renewal lay the first lessons of impermanence, the understanding that nothing built or buried could resist time entirely. Still, the burials continued. Still, the bones were painted, the dead arranged with care. Each act tied the living to something larger, something beyond the immediate struggle for food and fire. These early rituals were fragile beginnings of culture, the first steps into meaning beyond necessity. They whispered of memory, of continuity, of a human need to find significance in loss. And so, the rivers became archives, keeping fragments of this awakening within their mud and sand. A tooth here, a bead there, a shard of ochre clinging to a bone. thousands of years later, these remnants surface to us like messages carried across time, reminders that even in the earliest chapters, humanity was already shaping itself through story, ritual, and remembrance. The grasslands taught survival, but the rivers taught memory. To drink was to live. To bury was to remember. To tell stories by the fire was to carry both forward. In this way, the riverbanks became the first sanctuaries, places where the living and the dead, the seen and the unseen, flowed together. And as the stars shimmered above, reflected in the black surface of water, humans must have looked into that mirror and wondered not only who they were, but what they would become. The chapter ends as dawn breaks once more. Mist rises from the water, veiling the graves, softening the earth's scars. Children play at the edge, splashing, laughing, while elders kneel in silence, tracing fingers over the soil that holds their dead. The river flows on, indifferent yet eternal, carrying with it both life and loss. And in that endless movement lies the first understanding that humanity's story would not be written in permanence, but in echoes, in currents, in the fragile persistence of memory carried forward. The cliffs rose like guardians above the plains, sheer walls of stone carved by time and weather, their faces marked with cracks and shadows where birds nested and storms gathered. To those who sought shelter at their base, these cliffs were both barrier and refuge. Beneath their overhangs lay shallow caves, dry earth, and protection from the winds that swept unbroken across the grasslands. Here, at the meeting point of rock and fire, humans found a place not only to survive the night, but to begin shaping their inner world. The hearth became the heart of these shelters. Stones were arranged in circles, fire coaxed from sparks, embers fed carefully with twigs and branches gathered before dusk. Flames danced against the stone walls, their light flickering in endless patterns, casting shifting shapes that seemed to breathe. To sit before this glow was to feel the edge of night pushed back, to know a fragile but vital mastery over the darkness. The cliffs amplified the fire's presence, sending echoes of crackle and voice deep into the chambers. These echoes made the space feel alive, as though the walls themselves listened, as though the cliffs became silent companions. It was here that shadows began to take on meaning. A hand lifted toward the flames cast its outline on stone, stretched long and strange. Children discovered this magic first, laughing as they waved their fingers, transforming them into animals or spirits. Soon, ochre and charcoal joined the play. Smears became lines, lines became figures. A bison drawn on the wall was not just a bison, it was the memory of a hunt, the hope of one yet to come, or perhaps a prayer whispered into pigment. These images, fragile and imperfect, bound imagination to permanence. The walls of the cliffs became the first canvas for story. Outside, the world remained perilous. Hyenas prowled the edge of the firelight, their calls piercing the night. Owls glided silently overhead, their wings wide as they searched the grass for prey. But within the cave's embrace, humans sat close, the flames reflecting in their eyes, their voices carrying tales. Some stories were simple, recounting hunts or dangers overcome. Others reached beyond memory, into the realm of imagination. The cliff walls heard them all, and with every retelling, words became not just signals of survival, but vessels of meaning. The smell of smoke clung to hair, to hides, to the stone itself. Generations layered their presence here, each fire leaving ash, each meal leaving bones. Archaeologists today sift through these layers, uncovering hearth after hearth, a record of lives lived in continuity. For those who first made them, however, they were not records, but necessities. Fire roasted marrow, softened meat, hardened the tips of wooden spears. Yet it also did more. It gathered people together, turning strangers into kin, weaving bonds of trust in the flicker of flame. At times, storms rolled in from the horizon, black clouds swallowing the light of the sky. Rain lashed the plains, thunder split the air, and the cliffs trembled with sound. In those moments, the caves became sanctuaries of endurance. Flames sputtered but did not die, protected by stone. Families huddled together, eyes wide at the sky's fury, listening as water hammered against rock. When the storms passed, the air smelled of wet earth and lightning. To step outside then was to see the world renewed, the grass bent low, the animals silent, as though everything had been reset. In the safety of these intervals, imagination deepened. Firelight encouraged visions. The sparks that leapt upward seemed to rise into the stars, as if carrying prayers skyward. A stone glowing red in the flames was not only a tool, but a symbol of transformation, the earth itself shifting under human hands. Myths may have taken shape here, long before language was rich enough to hold them. Perhaps a hunter told of a beast larger than any seen, its spirit dwelling in the cliffs. Perhaps a woman described a dream, where the ancestors whispered through the fire's smoke. These tales blurred the line between memory and invention, between truth and dream. The cliffs bore witness to another transformation, the strengthening of bonds. When a child was born, the first cries echoed against the stone, carried outward as though announcing new life to the entire world. When someone died, their absence was felt most acutely around the fire. Sometimes bones were left within these shelters, tucked into crevices, accompanied by beads or ochre. To do so was to fold the dead into the very stone, to make them part of the cliff's endurance. In this way, the shelters became more than temporary homes. They became ancestral places, charged with memory and presence. Animals, too, found their way onto the walls. Horses with flowing manes, aurochs with horns that curved like crescents, mammoths with shaggy outlines, bears looming tall. Each line scratched into stone spoke of familiarity, of observation, of reverence. These creatures were not simply prey. They were companions in the great drama of existence, beings whose spirits demanded respect. To draw them was to honor them, or perhaps to invite their essence into the hunt. The act of marking the wall may have been as important as the hunt itself, a way of binding human life to the larger world of creatures and forces. Night after night, the cliffs echoed with voices, laughter, argument, song, silence. The fire burned down to embers, then to ash, only to be rekindled again at dawn. Each day the cycle repeated, and in that repetition lay the seeds of culture. Humans were no longer only surviving, they were creating a world of meaning, a shared reality that stretched beyond the immediate moment. The cliffs, the fire, the walls, they were stages where imagination began to leave its trace. As centuries passed, these shelters accumulated layer upon layer of presence. A painting faded, another was drawn beside it. Ashes piled, bones mixed with soil. To those who lived here, it was simply life unfolding. To us, it is evidence that humanity's spirit was already stretching beyond survival, reaching for continuity, for beauty, for permanence. And so, beneath the cliffs, with fires burning low and shadows dancing high, humanity's inner life deepened. In the flicker of flame on stone, in the outlines of hands pressed against walls, we glimpse the beginning of culture as we know it, the first stage on which story, ritual, and imagination stepped into light. The grasslands still called, the rivers still pulled. But in these cliffs, humanity discovered something new, a place where the external world could be reflected inward, where survival opened the door to meaning. Fires beneath the cliffs were not only warmth against the cold, they were sparks of the human soul, glowing against the vast and indifferent dark. The world we know is only the world that remains. Beneath the waters that now stretch between continents lie landscapes once alive with forests, herds, and human footsteps. When the ice withdrew at the end of the last glacial age, seas rose like patient giants, swallowing coastlines, turning valleys into gulfs and plains into seabeds. What we call the ocean floor today was, for tens of thousands of years, open land. Rivers coursed across it, fires burned upon it, voices echoed in the wind. Entire chapters of our beginnings lie hidden there, erased not by time alone, but by water's relentless advance. Imagine standing on a ridge in what is now the North Sea, looking out over grasslands rolling endlessly between what we know as England and Denmark. This was Doggerland, a vast plain where red deer grazed, aurochs bellowed, and families built shelters from driftwood and bone. Today, fishing nets occasionally dredge up fragments of this forgotten world, a spear point, a mammoth tusk, the skull of a child. These are not relics of the sea, but of the land that once was, drowned and silenced. The ocean covers it now, but memory lingers in the sediments, in the artifacts brought to the surface by chance. Doggerland was not alone. Beringia stretched between Siberia and Alaska, a land bridge of tundra and grass where humans and animals migrated with the seasons. For thousands of years, it was not a narrow crossing, but a broad world in itself, with rivers winding across it, game moving in vast herds, and people adapting to its cold expanse. When the waters rose, this world disappeared, leaving only echoes in genetic traces, in myths of a crossing to another land. What remains now is silence beneath waves, a reminder that much of our story may be sealed where we cannot yet reach. The ocean's claim was slow, but to those who lived through it, it must have felt like an unstoppable force, a creeping tide that year after year took more of the land. Villages once distant from the shore would have found themselves closer and closer until waves battered their homes. Fires built against the night would be extinguished, and the land where generations had buried their dead would vanish beneath the surf. This was no single cataclysm, but a relentless shift, a reminder that human permanence has always been fragile against the scale of Earth's changes. Perhaps it was in witnessing this loss that legends of floods first took root. Myths from Mesopotamia, from the Bible, from countless other cultures tell of waters rising to consume everything, of survival resting in the hands of a few, of gods who reshaped the world through deluge. Though shaped by imagination, these tales may echo the lived memory of people watching their homelands drown. For them, it was not myth, but reality. The land sinking, the graves of their ancestors swallowed, their stories scattered like silt. What lies beneath the seas is not only land, but possibly memory of culture. Were there settlements we will never see, built of wood and bone now dissolved? Were there songs sung on shores now forgotten, rituals carried out on cliffs now hidden in darkness? The thought is haunting, that human history may be far older and richer than we know, simply because it is locked beneath the waters where excavation is nearly impossible. Every artifact that surfaces from the seabed is like a whisper from this submerged past, a reminder that the narrative of humanity remains incomplete. The drowned valleys remind us that our ancestors were not static wanderers, but resilient adapters. As waters rose, they moved inland, shifted their camps, sought higher ground. Some followed rivers upstream into new lands, others crossed into territories once too distant. Migration was not only choice, but necessity. And with each move, knowledge carried forward. Which plants sustained, which stones cut cleanest, which animals could be followed across shifting landscapes. In this way, even loss became a teacher. Standing on modern shores, it is difficult to imagine the depth of what has been lost. Beneath the Mediterranean lie valleys that once connected islands. Beneath the Black Sea plains where people lived before waters surged through the Bosporus. Off the coasts of India, of Japan, of South America, divers discover stone tools and hearths now entombed in saltwater silence. Each discovery reshapes our understanding, yet each raises the same haunting thought. If so much has been lost, how much more might remain hidden? In the deep, where light cannot reach, the seabed holds silence. But silence is not emptiness. It is memory waiting to be deciphered. The ocean preserves and erases in equal measure. Wood rots, but stone endures. Bones scatter, but flint remains sharp. It is as though the sea has chosen what fragments we may glimpse, withholding the rest as if to remind us that knowledge has limits, that mystery is part of our inheritance. At night, when our ancestors stood on the last ridges of vanishing lands, they must have watched the moon rise over waters that once were grass. The tides followed the pull of that distant orb, and perhaps they wondered, as we still do, about forces greater than themselves. The ocean was no longer only a giver of fish and salt. It became a taker of memory, a devourer of land. To live in that shifting age was to feel the earth itself unstable, to realize that permanence was an illusion, yet humanity endured. The drowned valleys did not end the story, they transformed it. Those who fled the seas carried new myths, new scars, new memories of loss. They taught their children caution, reverence, perhaps fear. The sea was no longer only sustenance but mystery, a place where the ancestors slept, where forgotten homelands lay silent. And so, water entered human imagination not only as life, but as threshold, a boundary between what could be known and what was forever hidden. Today, when sonar scans the ocean floor or divers retrieve a fragment of worked stone, we are reminded that our beginnings remain unfinished. The valleys beneath the waves are not empty. They are the submerged chapters of a book we have only just begun to read. The seas may cover them, but the echoes remain, carried forward in myth, in story, in the restless curiosity that drives us still to search. The sunken valleys whisper of loss, but also of resilience. They remind us that humanity has always lived at the mercy of change, and that survival has never meant stillness. We adapt, we move, we carry memory forward. Even when the land itself vanishes, the fire of continuity endures. And so the chapter closes not with despair, but with haunting wonder. Beneath the calm surface of seas lies a world forgotten, a world once as real as the ground beneath our feet. To stand on the shore today is to stand on the edge of memory, knowing that beneath the horizon lies not only water, but the ghost of valleys where people once lived, loved, and dreamed. And if their voices no longer reach us, their silence still does, deep and unbroken, pressing against our imagination like the tide against the shore. Legends linger like shadows across time. Long after the stones have crumbled and the fire's gone out, stories remain, whispering of builders who came before, of civilizations erased yet remembered in fragments. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, names born from myth and speculation, carried across cultures as if echoes of something once real. These tales speak of cities swallowed by the sea, of temples that rose before memory, of knowledge older than the world we think we know. And while scholars caution us to treat these stories as inventions of imagination, their persistence suggests something deeper, that humanity has always felt haunted by the possibility of what was lost. It is easy to dismiss Atlantis as Plato's allegory, a moral parable about hubris and divine punishment. Yet the idea of a drowned world resonates because it reflects a truth already etched in human experience. People did watch their lands vanish under the sea, did see valleys swallowed, did lose entire homelands to floods. Perhaps Atlantis is less a single place than a memory of many losses woven into one enduring myth. The persistence of this story across centuries is less about a city's coordinates than about a wound in human memory. A wound left by the rising tides and vanishing shores. In the silence of the deserts, we find monuments that seem to speak in the same language as these myths. The great pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the stone platforms of Polynesia, each rises from the earth with a defiance against time. Some of these structures are understood, their builders known, their purpose traced, but others stand in mystery, their function uncertain, their age debated, their presence haunting. Why did people move stones heavier than anything we lift today? Why align temples with stars, solstices, and shadows that trace the heavens? Were they only practical, or were they reminders, cosmic echoes of a deeper inheritance? Consider Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. 12,000 years ago, while much of humanity still hunted and gathered, people there raised massive stone pillars carved with animals, foxes, vultures, lions, snakes. They arranged them in circles, burying them deliberately when their purpose was done. These stones tell us that even before villages and agriculture, humans were capable of astonishing vision and collaboration. But why did they do it? What stories did those carvings tell? What memories or myths were encoded in the spirals, the staring eyes, the repeated motifs? Archaeology offers theories, but the full truth is lost. And so, Göbekli Tepe stands like a doorway to the forgotten, a reminder that our assumptions about beginnings are fragile. Legends of lost builders reach far beyond one culture. In South America, the Inca spoke of Viracocha, a godlike figure who emerged from Lake Titicaca and taught humanity to build and to thrive before vanishing across the ocean. In Polynesia, chants recall islands that once stood above water but sank into the sea. In India, epics speak of cities beneath the waves, shimmering palaces visited by gods. In Greece, Atlantis is described as a land of concentric circles, a marvel of architecture gone in a single day. Different stories, but a shared theme. The presence of builders beyond memory, whose works vanished, but whose echoes remain. Skeptics argue that such tales are the inventions of imagination, ways of explaining natural disasters, or metaphors for spiritual truths. And they may be right. Yet even metaphors often root themselves in experience. Perhaps the myths exaggerate, but perhaps they exaggerate something real: the loss of lands, the fading of cultures, the destruction of monuments. The persistence of these stories across continents suggests that humanity collectively remembers the trauma of erasure. Myths are not history, but they are not nothing. They are fossils of memory, calcified into story. The idea of forgotten builders unsettles because it raises a question: how much might we have lost? If Göbekli Tepe could be built 12,000 years ago, when we believed humanity too scattered to create such works, what else might lie buried, drowned, or destroyed? Could there have been other circles of stone, other cities of wood and earth, erased before our eyes could ever glimpse them? Could knowledge have been built and then broken, leaving only whispers to carry forward? In the darkness of caves, handprints painted in ochre still cling to the walls. They are not cities, not temples, but they are presence, proof that people once stood there and left themselves behind. Multiply those handprints by all the places drowned by water, consumed by fire, buried by shifting earth, and the scale of absence becomes staggering. Civilization, as we define it, may not have begun once but many times, rising and falling like the tides, each leaving behind faint traces, an echo of the builders who came before. And yet, these echoes inspire as much as they haunt. The idea of forgotten builders expands the horizon of possibility. It reminds us that human imagination has always reached further than necessity. Whether or not Atlantis was real, the fact that it was dreamed at all tells us something about the human spirit. We are not content with what is visible. We yearn for what lies beyond, for the ruins hidden beneath waves, for the stories that slip through the cracks of history. The silence of the forgotten builders is not emptiness. It is challenge. It dares us to look deeper, to question what we accept, to imagine what might still lie beneath desert sand or ocean floor. Every stone circle uncovered, every submerged ruin discovered, every myth retold is a fragment of the echo, a reminder that our beginnings are more layered, more mysterious than we know. As night falls across the ruins, we can still see stones against stars, temples against the horizon. The question lingers: who else stood here before us, and what did they leave behind? Were they like us, with hopes and fears, with fires and families, or were they something we cannot yet imagine? The answers may remain buried, but the echoes carry forward, haunting us into curiosity, urging us to keep searching. And so the forgotten builders remain with us, not in the certainty of history, but in the persistence of myth, in the weight of stone, in the silence that refuses to be ignored. Their voices may be gone, but their echoes still reach us, carried by the wind across deserts, by waves across seas, by stories across generations. Whether they were gods, ancestors, or dreams, they are part of us. And in their absence, we hear not only what was lost, but what might still yet be found. Legends linger like shadows across time. Long after the stones have crumbled and the fire's gone out, stories remain, whispering of builders who came before, of civilizations erased yet remembered in fragments. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, names born from myth and speculation, carried across cultures as if echoes of something once real. These tales speak of cities swallowed by the sea, of temples that rose before memory, of knowledge older than the world we think we know. And while scholars caution us to treat these stories as inventions of imagination, their persistence suggests something deeper, that humanity has always felt haunted by the possibility of what was lost. It is easy to dismiss Atlantis as Plato's allegory, a moral parable about hubris and divine punishment. Yet the idea of a drowned world resonates because it reflects a truth already etched in human experience. People did watch their lands vanish under the sea, did see valleys swallowed, did lose entire homelands to floods. Perhaps Atlantis is less a single place than a memory of many losses woven into one enduring myth. The persistence of this story across centuries is less about a city's coordinates than about a wound in human memory, a wound left by the rising tides and vanishing shores. In the silence of deserts, we find monuments that seem to speak in the same language as these myths. The great pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the stone platforms of Polynesia, each rises from the earth with a defiance against time. Some of these structures are understood, their builders named, their purposes traced. But others stand in mystery, their function uncertain, their age debated, their presence haunting. Why did people move stones heavier than anything we lift today? Why align temples with stars, solstices, and shadows that trace the heavens? Were they only practical, or were they reminders? Cosmic echoes of a deeper inheritance? Consider Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. 12,000 years ago, while much of humanity still hunted and gathered, people there raised massive stone pillars carved with animals, foxes, vultures, lions, snakes. They arranged them in circles, burying them deliberately when their purpose was done. These stones tell us that even before villages and agriculture, humans were capable of astonishing vision and collaboration. But why did they do it? What stories did those carvings tell? What memories or myths were encoded in the spirals, the staring eyes, the repeated motifs? Archaeology offers theories, but the full truth is lost. And so Göbekli Tepe stands like a doorway to the forgotten, a reminder that our assumptions about beginnings are fragile. Legends of lost builders reach far beyond one culture. In South America, the Inca spoke of Viracocha, a godlike figure who emerged from Lake Titicaca and taught humanity to build and to thrive before vanishing across the ocean. In Polynesia, chants recall islands that once stood above water but sank into the sea. In India, epics speak of cities beneath the waves, shimmering palaces visited by gods. In Greece, Atlantis is described as a land of concentric circles, a marvel of architecture gone in a single day. Different stories, but a shared theme: the presence of builders beyond memory, whose works vanished, but whose echoes remain. Skeptics argue that such tales are the inventions of imagination, ways of explaining natural disasters, or metaphors for spiritual truths. And they may be right. Yet even metaphors often root themselves in experience. Perhaps the myths exaggerate, but perhaps they exaggerate something real: the loss of lands, the fading of cultures, the destruction of monuments. The persistence of these stories across continents suggests that humanity collectively remembers the trauma of erasure. Myths are not history, but they are not nothing. They are fossils of memory, calcified into story. The idea of forgotten builders unsettles because it raises a question: how much might we have lost? If Göbekli Tepe could be built 12,000 years ago, when we believed humanity too scattered to create such works, what else might lie buried, drowned, or destroyed? Could there have been other circles of stone, other cities of wood and earth, erased before our eyes could ever glimpse them? Could knowledge have been built and then broken, leaving only whispers to carry forward? In the darkness of caves, handprints painted in ochre still cling to the walls. They are not cities, not temples, but they are presence, proof that people once stood there and left themselves behind. Multiply those handprints by all the places drowned by water, consumed by fire, buried by shifting earth, and the scale of absence becomes staggering. Civilization, as we define it, may not have begun once, but many times, rising and falling like the tides, each leaving behind faint traces, an echo of the builders who came before. And yet, these echoes inspire as much as they haunt. The idea of forgotten builders expands the horizon of possibility. It reminds us that human imagination has always reached further than necessity. Whether or not Atlantis was real, the fact that it was dreamed at all tells us something about the human spirit. We are not content with what is visible. We yearn for what lies beyond, for the ruins hidden beneath waves, for the stories that slip through the cracks of history. The silence of the forgotten builders is not emptiness. It is challenge. It dares us to look deeper, to question what we accept, to imagine what might still lie beneath desert sand or ocean floor. Every stone circle uncovered, every submerged ruin discovered, every myth retold is a fragment of the echo, a reminder that our beginnings are more layered, more mysterious than we know. As night falls across the ruins, we can still see stones against stars, temples against the horizon. The question lingers: who else stood here before us, and what did they leave behind? Were they like us, with hopes and fears, with fires and families? Or were they something we cannot yet imagine? The answers may remain buried, but the echoes carry forward, haunting us into curiosity, urging us to keep searching. And so the forgotten builders remain with us, not in the certainty of history, but in the persistence of myth, in the weight of stone, in the silence that refuses to be ignored. Their voices may be gone, but their echoes still reach us, carried by the wind across deserts, by waves across seas, by stories across generations. Whether they were gods, ancestors, or dreams, they are part of us, and in their absence, we hear not only what was lost, but what might still yet be found. Chapter 6: The Reset of Fire and Flood. The earth has never been a gentle host. It shifts, erupts, collapses, and floods with a force that dwarfs human effort. To live on this planet has always been to live at the mercy of cataclysm. Fire bursts from mountains, ash turns day into night, rivers swell until they devour valleys, and seas roar inland with waves taller than trees. Our ancestors did not need myth to invent apocalypse. They lived through it. And each disaster carved itself into memory, shaping the stories of endings and beginnings that define humanity still. Volcanoes were among the most terrifying teachers. Imagine the people who watched Mount Toba erupt 74,000 years ago, an explosion so vast it darkened skies across continents. Ash drifted thousands of miles, animals died in heaps, plants withered under the choking sky. To stand beneath such fury was to feel the world itself turning against you. Those who survived carried the memory of fire from Earth's heart, a memory that would echo through myths of angry gods and mountains that breathe death. Even smaller eruptions, like Thera in the Aegean, left scars. The sea boiled, islands vanished, entire cultures disappeared into silence, and each time, the survivors began again, carrying forward both fear and resilience. Floods, too, reshaped existence. Glacial lakes burst their barriers, unleashing torrents that swept away forests and plains. In North America, the Missoula floods carved canyons in days that otherwise would take millennia to form. In Asia, rivers rose with monsoons, drowning crops, homes, and lives. To see the land vanish beneath water was to feel the fragility of everything built by human hands. These were not gentle tides, but walls of water that erased villages in hours, leaving behind silence and mud. No wonder myths of great floods appear across the world. They are echoes of lived disaster, not mere inventions of imagination. Fire came from the sky as well as the earth. Meteorites streaked across the heavens, some exploding in midair with the force of bombs, others striking and leaving craters that reshaped landscapes. To those who saw them, the sky itself seemed to break apart, stars falling in fiery rage. Perhaps it was such an event that fueled legends of celestial punishment, of gods casting stones from the heavens. The Tunguska explosion in Siberia in 1908 leveled forests the size of cities. How many earlier strikes left their scars in human memory, transformed into myth? Yet these disasters, as devastating as they were, did not end humanity. They reset it. People scattered, adapted, rebuilt. Crops failed, so diets shifted. Villages vanished, so new ones rose elsewhere. Populations shrank, then grew again. Each catastrophe forced change, and in that change lay resilience. Humanity is not defined by its immunity to disaster, but by its ability to endure it, to weave loss into story and loss into survival. The myths of fire and flood carry lessons not only of destruction, but of rebirth. In Mesopotamia, the flood cleansed the world so life could begin anew. In Hindu traditions, fire cycles through the universe, destroying so creation can start again. In countless indigenous stories, floods reset the earth, sparing a few who carry forward the seeds of renewal. These are not just metaphors. They are reflections of a truth humans learned early. The world ends often, but life continues, reshaped. Perhaps this is why ancient cultures built monuments aligned with the heavens, why they marked solstices, tracked comets, and watched the stars so carefully. To observe the skies was to anticipate disaster, to predict the rhythms of floods, to seek patterns in chaos. Stones that track the sun are not only religious, they are survival tools, reminders that cataclysm comes and must be prepared for. Beneath myth lay knowledge, encoded not in books but in ritual and stone. To live with constant threat fostered humility. People knew they were small before the mountain, fragile before the flood, powerless before the sky's fire. Yet they also knew they were resilient. The very fact that humanity stands here now is testament to the generations who endured eruptions, floods, and meteors, who carried fire forward from ash and rebuilt villages on higher ground. Each reset was painful, but each forged strength. The silence of the drowned valleys, the ash of vanished forests, the scars of craters, all are reminders that the earth writes and rewrites itself without pause. And humanity's story is woven into those resets, not in defiance but in adaptation. Fire and flood may erase, but they also force renewal. The resilience born from disaster is not weakness, but identity. Humanity is not the species that avoids endings. It is the species that survives them. And so this chapter closes not in despair, but in awe. For every time the earth has burned, flooded, or shattered, people endured. They remembered, they told stories, they wove myths that still echo today. The resets remind us that we are fragile, but they also remind us that fragility can persist, can adapt, can outlast even mountains. Fire and flood have shaped us, and they will shape us again. Yet always, when the waters recede and the ash clears, there is fire to rekindle, seed to plant, story to tell. The world begins anew, and so does humanity. Across wind-swept plains, on lonely hills, in forests where the trees themselves seem to listen, there stand stones that refuse to explain themselves. They rise in circles, align in rows, or sit in isolation as if placed by hands with a purpose long forgotten. They are mute, yet their silence is heavy. They press against imagination, stirring questions they will not answer. For as long as they have stood, they have watched the skies turn, the seasons shift, and generations pass beneath them. But they do not speak. Stonehenge, with its towering trilithons, remains one of the most haunting of these monuments. Its great arches of stone were dragged across miles, raised with effort so immense it defies easy explanation. Scholars tell us of solstice alignments, of ceremonial spaces, of calendars written not in ink, but in shadow and light. And yet, standing among those stones, one feels less like a visitor to a monument and more like a witness to something unfinished, something left deliberately veiled. Why were the dead buried there? Why did people return to this circle for over 1,000 years, reshaping it again and again. The stones will not say. Stonehenge is not alone. Across the British Isles lie countless megaliths, dolmens, passage tombs, standing stones whose meanings blur between the practical and the sacred. Some align with stars, some with the rising sun, some with no visible pattern at all. Their silence is part of their power. To see them is to feel both wonder and estrangement, as though humanity itself once spoke a language we can no longer hear. The stones remain, but the words are lost. Far away in the Andes, the stones of Sacsayhuaman in Peru fit together with such precision that no blade of grass slips between them. Blocks weighing hundreds of tons rise in terraces, their edges carved into intricate angles that interlock without mortar. The builders are known to us as the Inca, yet even they spoke of inheriting works from those who came before. Myths tell of giants who raised walls, of gods who shaped rock like clay. To stand before these walls is to feel the presence of effort beyond measure, purpose beyond comprehension. They endure storms and centuries, yet remain unyielding in their refusal to explain themselves. In Easter Island, Moai statues gaze inland from the coasts, their faces solemn, their bodies half buried. They are guardians, ancestors, symbols of power and presence. But what did they mean to those who raised them? Was it reverence, remembrance, or warning? The stones keep their secrets, their expressions unreadable, their silence unbroken. The people who carved them left behind songs and chants, but time and colonial erasure silenced much of that voice. The statues remain as witnesses, their story half told, their meaning suspended in mystery. Everywhere we look, the same theme emerges. Stones raised with effort beyond survival, aligned with sky and sun, but refusing to explain themselves. They remind us that our ancestors were not only hunters and farmers, but visionaries who looked outward, upward, beyond. These structures suggest that humans once sought meaning in connection with the cosmos, in the dance of stars and shadows. And yet, as centuries passed, that meaning dissolved, leaving only mute testimony. Perhaps the stones were not meant to explain themselves. Perhaps their silence is deliberate. A circle of stone may not have been a book to be read, but a presence to be felt. The people who built them may not have cared if their descendants understood. They cared only that the stones endured, that they stood as anchors of meaning against the flood of time. The silence may be the point. To stand among them is to listen, not to be told. The stones also reveal a tension in our perception of the past. We imagine ancient people as simple, their lives consumed by survival. And yet, again and again, they invested immense effort in monuments that served no immediate practical need. Why? Perhaps to bind their communities through shared labor. Perhaps to connect earth to sky, life to death. Perhaps to remember. Or perhaps to remind themselves that they were more than fragile bodies. They were makers of permanence. The act of building in stone was an act of defiance against the ephemerality of life. And yet, time humbles even stone. Many monuments lie collapsed, buried, overgrown. Some were quarried for later buildings, others toppled by earthquake, others eroded until their original form is barely recognizable. But even in ruin, they endure as mysteries. Broken stones still hold silence. Fallen pillars still speak through absence. A collapsed dolmen is still a marker of something once meant. The silence does not fade. Modern archaeology offers theories. Calendars, temples, burial sites, centers of ritual or trade. Each explanation feels plausible, yet incomplete. The stones resist full understanding, as though reminding us that the past is not a puzzle to be solved, but a presence to be felt. Their silence keeps them alive. To strip them of mystery would be to diminish their power. They stand not as answers, but as questions carved in rock. At night, when stars wheel above Stonehenge, or when moonlight casts long shadows across standing stones in Brittany, one feels the same awe their builders must have felt. The stones are not only structures, they are participants in the cosmic dance, catching the first light of solstice dawn, channeling shadows into passage tombs, framing the heavens through narrow corridors. These alignments remind us that our ancestors watched the sky with devotion, weaving their lives into the greater rhythms of cosmos and earth. The stones are not mute, after all. They speak in light and shadow, in silence and alignment, if we learn to listen differently. But still, they do not tell us why. The why is lost, and perhaps that loss is their greatest gift. They compel us to wonder, to imagine, to acknowledge that not everything can be known. They remind us that mystery itself is part of the human inheritance. We do not live only by answers. We live also by questions, by the spaces where certainty dissolves. The stones that do not speak still shape us. Tourists walk among them. Pilgrims still circle them. Scientists measure and map them. Poets and storytellers weave them into tales. They endure not only as remnants of the past, but as presences in the present, shaping imagination, shaping curiosity, shaping awe. Their silence is fertile, and in that silence we find ourselves reflected. And so this chapter ends beneath the gaze of stones that refuse explanation. Their endurance humbles us. Their silence unsettles us. Their presence stirs us. They will outlast us, as they outlasted those who built them. And long after our own words have faded, the stones will remain, mute and powerful, reminding the future that humanity is not only flesh and fire, but also mystery carved in rock. We like to imagine ourselves as alone, the singular heirs of humanity. Yet for most of our history, we were not solitary. We walked a world populated by others who were almost us, reflections in the mirror of evolution, shadows who shared the earth and the fire, but who are gone now, leaving only fragments of bone and faint traces in our blood. The Neanderthals, the Denisovans, the hobbits of Flores, and perhaps others still undiscovered, all were part of the human story, not as distant cousins in textbooks, but as companions in survival. Their absence is a silence we carry within us. The Neanderthals lived in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, enduring ice ages, shaping tools, tending fires, burying their dead. They were not brutish caricatures, but people with culture, strength, and tenderness. In caves from Spain to the Caucasus, their tools and hearths remain. Some of their skeletons show signs of healed injuries, suggesting care given to the wounded. Others are buried with objects, flowers, pigments, tools, gestures of meaning beyond survival. In their gaze, if we could meet it, we would not see beasts but kin, and yet they are gone. Their faces no longer turn toward the fire, their voices no longer echo in caves. For years, scholars asked why. Did Homo sapiens outcompete them, outthink them, outlast them? Or was it not conquest, but absorption, our bloodlines merging, their DNA carried forward in ours? Today, genetic studies tell us that most people outside Africa carry small traces of Neanderthal ancestry, whispers in our very cells. They are not fully gone, for they live within us, shadows woven into our bodies. But the people themselves, their distinct line, is silent. In the mountains of Siberia, a single finger bone found in Denisova Cave revealed another lost branch, the Denisovans. Almost nothing is known of them, yet their legacy endures in our DNA. They left behind no monuments, no obvious art, only fragments of genome hidden in our blood. And yet, they too were human, walking, breathing, imagining, surviving in lands of snow and forest. The silence around them is deeper than the Neanderthals, for we cannot yet picture their faces, their voices, their rituals. They are shadows still waiting to step into the light of knowledge. On the island of Flores, archaeologists uncovered remains of beings small in stature, scarcely more than a meter tall. Nicknamed hobbits, they walked upright, made tools, hunted small animals, and survived until as recently as 50,000 years ago. To imagine them is to imagine an entire branch of humanity, miniature yet resilient, living in tropical forests while mammoths still roamed the north. Their disappearance is a reminder that the human tree had many branches, and not all were destined to endure. To walk the earth, then, was to walk among others. Imagine a valley where a group of Homo sapiens light a fire, only to see in the distance another fire. Neanderthals gathered, their eyes reflecting the same flame. What passed between them? Fear, competition, perhaps violence, but also exchange, perhaps friendship, perhaps love. For the DNA evidence tells us that unions occurred, that children were born from the mingling of these lines. The shadow of other humans was not always conflict. It was also kinship. What would it have felt like to look into their eyes, to see yourself reflected, but not quite mirrored, to hear voices shaped by different throats, words perhaps different, perhaps similar, carried on the same air? Such encounters must have been uncanny, a reminder that the world was larger than one's own people. Otherness was not abstract. It was embodied in flesh and blood, in neighbors who were almost us. But shadows fade. One by one, these branches disappeared. The reasons remain uncertain: climate change narrowing their habitats, competition for food, diseases carried unknowingly, the slow erosion of small populations over time. The story is not one of triumph, but of loss. Humanity today is reduced to a single line, a single surviving branch, where once there were many. We are the inheritors, but we are also the last witnesses, and yet the shadows endure. In the caves where Neanderthals painted, where they left handprints and carved shapes, their presence still lingers. The pigments remain vivid, their fingers pressed against the stone in the same gesture as ours. In the genes that shape our bodies, in our immune systems and even our skin, fragments of their inheritance live on. They are gone, but not erased. They are echoes carried within us, voices muted, but not silenced. The shadow of other humans also lingers in our imagination. Myths of giants, of little people, of beings half human, half spirit. These may echo faint memories of times when we were not alone. Stories passed down through generations, reshaped into folklore, may conceal deep memories of meeting others who shared the fire, but not the exact same face. What we now call myth may be memory, stretched across millennia, fading but not gone. Their absence humbles us. We are not the pinnacle, but the remnant. We are not the inevitable outcome, but the survivors of a tree pruned by time. To know that others lived, loved, hunted, dreamed, and vanished reminds us that survival is fragile. Our uniqueness today is not destiny, it is accident. The shadows remind us that our place is not secure, that existence itself is always temporary, always at risk. And yet, their absence deepens our sense of wonder. To imagine them is to imagine the richness of what humanity once was. A chorus of voices, a diversity of forms, a world alive with different ways of being human. Their silence presses us to remember that the story of humanity is not only about progress, not only about survival, but also about loss. We walk forward carrying their shadows beside us, silent companions on the long road of time. As the fire dies down at the close of this chapter, imagine the last of the Neanderthals standing in a cave, watching the embers fade. Outside, the world is changing, new people spreading, climates shifting, herds moving differently. He stares into the glow, perhaps sensing the end, perhaps not. He breathes, he blinks, he feels hunger and hope, just as we do. But when the fire goes out, no hand rekindles it. Silence falls, and the shadow is left behind. And yet, as long as we remember them, as long as we see their faces in reconstructed bone, as long as we carry their DNA in our blood, they are not wholly gone. They live in us as echoes, as reminders, as kin unseen but not forgotten. The shadow of other humans stretches still across our path, a quiet presence urging us to humility, to memory, to awe. Long before telescopes turned the heavens into maps and data, humans tilted their heads back and saw a canvas alive with mystery. The stars were not distant spheres of gas, but fires burning in the great dark, eyes of ancestors, gods, or beasts watching from above. To lie on the grasslands or perch on a cliff was to look into a vault without end, a space that seemed both eternal and intimate. The night sky was the oldest storybook, the first library, the one that needed no words, only imagination. Our ancestors were not blind to patterns. The movement of stars across the sky was a rhythm, steady and precise. The moon waxed and waned, calling forth tides and marking time. The sun rose and fell, shifting its place on the horizon with the seasons. To live close to the land was to notice these movements and to depend on them. Hunters and farmers alike knew that the position of the stars told them when herds migrated, when rains would come, when fields should be sown. But the sky was more than calendar. It was a mirror for meaning. In caves and on bone fragments, we find markings that may be early star maps, dots and lines scratched to echo constellations. At Lascaux, some believe the painted bulls and dots above them align with the Pleiades cluster, suggesting that 30,000 years ago, people were already weaving sky into story. To gaze upward was not idle curiosity. It was to situate oneself within a cosmos alive with signals. The heavens were not silent. They spoke in light. The builders of megaliths and temples raised their stones, not only for earth, but for sky. At Newgrange in Ireland, a passage tomb built over 5,000 years ago, the rising sun of the winter solstice pierces the dark chamber, filling it with light for a few fleeting moments. Stonehenge frames the midsummer sunrise, its stones catching dawn and dusk in careful alignments. In Egypt, pyramids were set in relation to Orion and Sirius, the celestial guides of time and eternity. Across the world, humans oriented their lives not only to the land beneath their feet, but to the heavens above their heads. To see such alignments is to feel awe. These were not random stones, not careless arrangements. They required observation across generations, memory carried forward, patience to notice the slow shifting of stars. What compelled such devotion? Was it survival, the need to know when floods would rise or when herds would move? Or was it something more, a sense that the sky itself was sacred, that its rhythms held truths about existence itself? Perhaps it was both, inseparable, for survival and reverence often intertwine. Stories of descent from the heavens appear in myth after myth. The Dogon people of Mali tell of beings from Sirius who came to teach them. In Polynesia, navigators read the stars as though they were living companions, guiding canoes across the Pacific. In the Andes, the Milky Way was seen as a great celestial river, mirrored in the waters that flowed through valleys below. In every culture, the stars were woven into human destiny, their light shaping ritual, memory, and dream. Looking upward also sparked questions that reach into philosophy. Where do we come from? Are we alone? What lies beyond the horizon of sight? These are questions we still ask with telescopes and spacecraft, but their roots are ancient. To watch a meteor streak across the night was to feel the universe move in sudden violence. To see an eclipse was to witness the day itself vanish, replaced by a shadow that seemed to devour the sun. Such events terrified and inspired, becoming woven into myth as omens, judgments, or messages from gods. The heavens were never indifferent. They were alive, watching, responding. And yet there is humility in such gazing. To see the stars is to feel small, to feel oneself part of something vast beyond comprehension. Early humans may not have calculated distances or masses, but they felt the enormity of the night. Beneath the sky, they must have asked the same questions we do. What lies beyond, and why are we here? The search for meaning has always been as much cosmic as earthly. Some myths speak of humans as children of the stars, our souls descending from the heavens and returning when the body falls away. Others speak of ancestors who became constellations, their stories written in light so future generations would not forget. These tales remind us that the sky was not distant, but intimate. The stars were not far away. They were kin, guides, companions. In this turning toward the heavens, humanity expanded itself. Survival tied us to earth, but imagination lifted us upward. To raise stones in alignment with solstices, to carve symbols that matched constellations, to chant stories of gods and heroes who traveled among the stars. All of this was an early step into a broader identity. We were not creatures of soil alone. We were creatures of sky as well. The horizon became more than a line dividing land from air. It became a threshold, a place of possibility. To cross the horizon in story or imagination was to venture beyond the known, into the realm of gods, ancestors, or mysteries. This longing has never left us. Today, it takes the form of rockets and probes, but at its heart, it is the same yearning that drew eyes upward tens of thousands of years ago. Even now, as we understand more of the physics of stars, their light still humbles us. Each pinpoint is a sun, each sun a potential cradle of worlds. To imagine this was once pure dream. Now it is science. But the wonder remains unchanged. The heavens are not less mysterious for being mapped. They are more so, for their vastness grows the more we learn. And so, in this chapter of humanity's story, we see the beginning of that upward gaze. The grasslands, rivers, cliffs, and stones taught us survival, memory, ritual. But the sky taught us awe. It lifted our eyes beyond immediate need, into a cosmos that both dwarfed and dignified us. The horizons we sought were no longer only across valleys or seas. They stretched into infinity. When our ancestors stood around fires and pointed to constellations, they were not merely naming patterns. They were situating themselves in the universe. To speak of Orion or the Pleiades was to say, we are here, part of this, beneath this eternal canopy. And in that act, humanity became something more than survival. We became dreamers, seekers, a species defined not only by the earth beneath our feet, but by the stars above our heads. The horizon beyond Earth has always been both unreachable and essential. To chase it is to chase ourselves, our origins, our meaning. And even as we build ships of steel and fire to pierce that sky, The truth is that the journey began long ago, when someone lifted their eyes, traced a pattern in the stars, and wondered. Beneath the noise of daily survival, beneath the chatter of myth and the flicker of firelight, there has always been a deeper silence, one that stretches beyond memory, beyond history, beyond even the existence of our kind. It is the silence of deep time, vast and unyielding, against which all of humanity's story is but a spark. To step into this perspective is to feel both humbled and unsettled, for in deep time we are small, brief, and fragile. Yet in that same silence, we discover awe. The earth itself carries the marks of ages we cannot fathom. Mountains rose and crumbled before our species ever drew its first breath. Seas advanced and retreated, carving coasts that vanished long before human eyes saw them. Whole forests thrived, filled with creatures alien to us, only to fall into ash and stone. The dinosaurs reigned for millions of years, their footprints pressed into mud that hardened long before humans learned to walk upright. Their silence echoes still, preserved in bones that dwarf us, reminders that dominance is never permanent, and time erases even the mightiest. Against such immensity, our own story feels fragile. From the first chipped stone to the building of vast cities, humanity has lived only in the briefest blink of geological time. If the Earth's history were compressed into a single day, our entire presence would fall within the final seconds before midnight. And yet, within those seconds, we have filled the world with firelight, voices, and memory. We have left handprints on cave walls, stones aligned with stars, and tools scattered across valleys. We have made ourselves known, not by outlasting deep time, but by carving meaning within it. Still, the silence of deep time surrounds us. Archaeology uncovers fragments, bones, tools, carvings, but for every discovery, countless others lie buried or dissolved. What we know is only a fraction. What we do not know is an ocean of absence. Civilizations have risen and collapsed, their ruins swallowed by jungle or sand. Languages once spoken have vanished entirely, leaving no trace. Entire peoples have left only faint echoes in genetics or faint imprints in story. The silence of deep time is not empty. It is filled with all that is forgotten. Myths themselves may be attempts to resist that silence. Flood legends, sky stories, tales of lost builders. Each is a defiance against oblivion, a way to carry memory forward even when the stones crumble. Yet myths too fade, reshaped or lost as generations pass. The silence grows, swallowing not only bones and monuments, but also voices, dreams, and names. Deep time is patient. It waits, erasing and erasing, until even the greatest civilizations are only faint traces in the dust. And yet, in contemplating that silence, we feel something stir. For though deep time dwarfs us, it also connects us. To stand on a cliff and see layers of stone, each stratum a record of millions of years, is to recognize that we belong to something vast. Our bodies are built from the dust of stars, our bones from minerals shaped over eons, our blood from waters that cycled through oceans long before we were born. We are temporary, yes, but we are also part of the continuum. Deep time is not only silence, it is also kinship. Consider the fossilized shell pressed into rock. It is silent, yet it speaks of oceans that covered deserts, of tides that washed across land where no sea now lies. Consider the ancient glacier that carved valleys long before words existed. Its silence remains, but its mark endures. In the same way, humanity will leave traces, ruins, artifacts, perhaps even signals sent into the stars. Whether anyone will read them is uncertain, but they will remain, small signatures pressed into the fabric of time. the silence of deep time also reminds us of impermanence. Civilizations rise believing themselves eternal, but the earth is indifferent. Ash will cover cities, seas will rise, deserts will claim farmland. In the vast scale of time, permanence is illusion. Yet paradoxically, it is this very impermanence that gives our lives intensity. To know we are fleeting is to cherish the moments we have, the warmth of fire, the telling of stories, the gaze into the stars. We live in seconds, but those seconds are filled with meaning. Science gives us glimpses into this immensity. We know the Earth is over 4.5 billion years old, that our species is only about 300,000 years young, that the universe itself stretches nearly 14 billion years into the past. These numbers stagger us, yet they also ground us. We are not isolated. We are woven into the cosmos itself. Our atoms once belonged to stars. Our future may belong to dust. And yet here we are, in this brief moment, reflecting, wondering, imagining. The silence of deep time is not only erasure, it is also invitation. For perhaps what matters is not how long we endure, but how deeply we live within our brief window. The Neanderthals are gone, but their fires burned as brightly as ours. Forgotten builders are lost, but their stones still stand. Civilizations vanished, but their myths ripple across time. Even in silence, something endures. The echo of existence, the persistence of wonder. Deep time does not negate humanity. It frames it, placing our fragile story within an endless canvas. At the edge of this silence, we find ourselves gazing outward once again. The stars remind us that deep time is not confined to Earth. Galaxies spin, supernovae bloom and fade, black holes consume light. Our planet is but a mote in a cosmic ocean, our species a fleeting visitor. And yet, against this vastness, we dare to send our voices into space, to etch our presence on golden records, to imagine futures where our story continues among the stars. Perhaps this is humanity's deepest defiance, to answer the silence not with despair, but with curiosity. In the end, the silence of deep time is not something to conquer. It cannot be conquered. It is something to recognize, to respect, to hold within us as both humbling and liberating. It tells us that we are not eternal, but it also tells us that we are part of eternity's fabric. Our lives are short, but they are made of the same matter as the mountains, the seas, the stars. We belong to the silence, but we also belong to the song that interrupts it, however briefly. And so, humanity's first chapter closes not with finality, but with resonance. The grasslands, the rivers, the fires, the sunken valleys, the forgotten builders, the floods, the stones, the shadows of our vanished kin, and the horizons of stars, all flow into this final perspective. We are temporary, yet we are luminous. We are fragile, yet we leave echoes. We are small, yet within us lives the capacity to imagine deep time itself. The silence of deep time endures. But within that silence, for this brief span, we speak.